There's something magical about the smell of freshly baked bread, that warm, yeasty aroma that fills the air and makes your stomach rumble. For most of us, grabbing a loaf from the supermarket shelf is part of our weekly routine. But have you ever wondered how those perfectly sliced loaves labeled freshly baked actually get made? Today, we're taking you behind the scenes of a massive bread factory to show you exactly how your everyday bread goes from raw flour to that soft, pillowy loaf sitting in your kitchen. First, the core ingredients. Despite all the technology and automation in modern bread factories, bread is still made from remarkably simple ingredients. The basic recipe hasn't changed much in thousands of years, and most factory-made bread contains just a handful of components that work together to create that familiar taste and texture we all know. First and foremost is flour, which makes up the bulk of any bread recipe. Most factory bread uses white wheat flour that's been milled from wheat grains grown on farms across the UK and Europe. The flour arrives at the factory in massive tanker trucks that pump it directly into huge storage silos. These silos can hold hundreds of tons of flour, ensuring there's always enough supply to keep production running without interruption. The flour used in bread making is specifically chosen for its protein content, which affects how the dough behaves and how the final bread turns out. Higher protein flour creates stronger gluten networks, which gives bread better structure and rise. Water is the second most important ingredient, and it's needed to hydrate the flour and activate the gluten proteins that give bread its chewy texture. The water used in bread making goes through filtration systems to ensure it's completely pure and free from any minerals or chemicals that could affect the taste or texture. The temperature of the water is also carefully controlled because it affects how quickly the yeast works and how the dough develops. Too cold and the yeast will be sluggish, too hot and it could kill the yeast entirely. Yeast is the magical ingredient that makes bread rise and gives it that characteristic flavour. Factory bread uses commercial baker's yeast, which is a living organism that feeds on sugars in the flour and produces carbon dioxide gas as a byproduct. This gas gets trapped in the dough, creating thousands of tiny bubbles that make the bread light and fluffy. The amount of yeast used in factory bread is typically higher than in traditional recipes because the fast production process doesn't allow time for slow, natural fermentation. More yeast means faster rising, which is essential when you're trying to produce thousands of loaves per hour. Salt is essential for flavor and also plays an important role in controlling the yeast activity and strengthening the gluten structure. Without salt, bread would taste bland and the texture would be weak and sticky. Most bread contains about 1 to 2% salt by weight, which is just enough to enhance the flavor without making it taste salty. The salt also helps regulate how fast the yeast works, preventing the dough from rising too quickly and becoming unstable. Fat is added to most factory bread in the form of vegetable oil or shortening. The fat makes the bread softer, helps it stay fresh longer, and gives it a richer taste and better mouthfeel. Some traditional breads don't contain any fat, but most modern sandwich bread includes it to achieve that soft, tender texture that people expect. The fat coats the gluten strands and starches, creating a more tender crumb and preventing the bread from becoming tough or chewy. Sugar is included in small amounts to feed the yeast and help with browning during baking. It also adds a subtle sweetness that balances the other flavors. Some breads contain more sugar than others, with sweeter varieties like brioche or certain sandwich breads having higher sugar content. The sugar caramelizes during baking, contributing to that golden brown crust color and adding depth to the flavor. Finally, there are various improvers and additives that help with the industrial production process. These can include vitamin C or ascorbic acid, which strengthens the dough and helps it rise better. Emulsifiers help the ingredients blend together more smoothly and keep the bread fresh for longer. Flour treatment agents ensure consistent results batch after batch. While some people worry about these additives, they're used in very small quantities and are approved as safe for consumption by food safety authorities. These ingredients allow factories to produce consistent, high-quality bread at the incredible speeds required for mass production. The fascinating production process. Now let's get into the heart of the operation and see how all these simple ingredients transform into the loaves you see on supermarket shelves. The process is a carefully choreographed sequence of steps that happens with remarkable speed and precision. Everything begins in the mixing room, where the real magic starts to happen. Massive industrial mixers, each one the size of a small car, combine all the ingredients together. These aren't your typical kitchen mixers. They're powerful machines capable of handling hundreds of kilograms of dough at once. The flour is pumped in from the storage silos through pipes in the ceiling. Water is added through precisely calibrated meters that ensure exactly the right amount. Yeast, salt, fat, and other ingredients are measured out by automated systems and dumped into the mixer. The Chorleywood bread process, developed in the 1960s, uses intense high-speed mixing that develops the gluten structure in just a few minutes. Traditional bread making involves gentle mixing and long resting periods, but this modern method uses mixers that spin at high speeds, working the dough aggressively and incorporating air at the same time. This vigorous mixing partially replaces the need for long fermentation, allowing the entire process to happen much faster than traditional methods ever could. The mixing typically takes about 3 to 5 minutes, which is incredibly short compared to traditional methods that can take 20 minutes or more. During this time, the mixer is working the dough so hard that it actually heats up from friction. Temperature sensors monitor the dough constantly, and some mixers even have cooling systems built into their jackets to prevent it from getting too warm. The finished dough should be smooth, elastic, and at just the right temperature to keep the yeast happy and active. Once mixing is complete, the dough is transferred to the dividing machine. This clever piece of equipment cuts the massive batch of dough into individual portions, each one weighing exactly the right amount for a single loaf. The divider works incredibly fast, cutting and portioning the dough with mechanical precision. Each portion is exactly the same size, which is crucial for ensuring all the loaves bake evenly and look identical on the shelf. The divider uses a piston system that pushes dough through chambers that cut it into precise pieces. After dividing, the dough portions go through a quick rounding process where they're shaped into rough balls. This helps develop the dough's structure and makes it easier to work with in the next stages. The rounding machine uses rotating cups or cones that spin the dough pieces, pulling them into tight, smooth balls. The rounded dough balls then move onto a conveyor belt that takes them to the resting stage, sometimes called the intermediate proof. During this resting period, which typically lasts about 5 to 10 minutes, the dough relaxes after all the rough treatment it's received. The gluten strands that were stretched and stressed during mixing and dividing get a chance to relax, making the dough easier to shape. The dough balls sit on the conveyor, slowly moving along while the yeast continues to produce gas and the dough starts to puff up slightly. This relaxation is essential because tight, stressed dough would fight against the molding machines and create misshapen loaves. Next comes the molding stage, where the dough gets shaped into its final form. The dough balls pass through a series of rollers that flatten them out into rectangles. Then they're rolled up tightly into a cylinder shape, which will become the classic loaf shape we all recognize. The molding machines are incredibly precise, ensuring each loaf is rolled to exactly the same tightness and shape. Inconsistent molding would result in loaves that rise unevenly or have irregular shapes. The rolling action also helps develop the dough structure further and removes any large air bubbles that could create holes in the finished bread. The molded dough is then placed into baking tins, usually 4 loaves per tin in commercial operations. These tins are designed to give the bread its rectangular shape and support it while it rises and bakes. The tins move along on a conveyor system to the proofing chamber, which is basically a large heated room with controlled humidity. The proofing chamber is where the bread gets its final rise before baking. The environment inside is kept warm and humid, which are perfect conditions for the yeast to work its magic. The temperature is typically around 35 to 40 degrees Celsius, and the humidity is high to prevent the dough's surface from drying out and forming a skin. The loaves spend about 50 to 60 minutes in the proofer, during which time they roughly double in size as the yeast produces carbon dioxide gas that inflates the dough. Do you know that the proofing stage is crucial for developing the bread's texture and creating those air pockets that make it soft and light? If the bread doesn't proof enough, it'll be dense and heavy with a tight crumb. If it proofs too much, it can collapse during baking and end up with a coarse, irregular texture. That's why modern factories use sophisticated monitoring systems to ensure the proofing conditions are exactly right. Some advanced systems even use cameras and sensors to determine when each batch of dough has reached the optimal size for baking. After proofing, the loaves are ready for the oven, and this is where the transformation from dough to bread really happens. Industrial bread ovens are nothing like your oven at home. They're enormous tunnel ovens that can be 30 meters long or more, with different temperature zones along their length. The tins of proofed dough enter one end of the oven and emerge as golden brown baked bread at the other end. It's like a conveyor belt that takes dough on a journey through controlled heat, transforming it completely along the way. The baking process typically takes about 20 to 25 minutes, depending on the size of the loaves and the specific recipe. As the tins move through the oven on a conveyor system, the bread goes through several distinct stages. In the first zone, the heat causes the yeast to become superactive, producing a final burst of gas that makes the bread rise even more. This is called oven spring, and it's what gives bread that beautiful domed top. The temperature in this zone is carefully controlled to maximize this spring without setting the structure too quickly. As the temperature continues to rise in subsequent zones, the yeast eventually dies off at around 60 degrees Celsius, and the gluten proteins begin to set, giving the bread its structure. The starches in the flour gelatinize, meaning they absorb water and swell, contributing to the bread's soft interior. Meanwhile, the surface of the bread starts to brown through a process called the Maillard reaction, which creates hundreds of flavor compounds and gives the crust its golden color and delicious taste. The ovens are carefully designed to provide even heat distribution, ensuring every loaf bakes uniformly. Some ovens use direct flame heating, while others use hot air circulation or radiant heat from electric elements. Many modern ovens use steam injection in the early stages of baking, which helps the bread develop a nice crust and achieve maximum volume. The steam keeps the surface of the dough flexible for longer, allowing it to expand more before the crust sets. When the loaves emerge from the oven, they're immediately removed from the baking tins. This is done by a machine that literally flips the tins upside down, causing the hot loaves to tumble out onto another conveyor belt. The empty tins are then sent back to the beginning of the process to be filled with fresh dough, creating a continuous cycle. The tins go through a washing system to remove any stuck-on dough or residue before being reused. The freshly baked loaves are extremely hot, often with internal temperatures around 95 degrees Celsius. They need to cool down before they can be sliced and packaged, so they're transported through a cooling tower or cooling conveyor. These systems use fans to circulate air around the loaves, bringing their temperature down to around 35 degrees Celsius over the course of about an hour or two. The cooling process is carefully managed because if it happens too quickly, the bread can develop condensation inside, which makes it soggy. Do you know why it's so important to cool bread properly before slicing it? If you try to slice bread while it's still hot, the interior is too soft and steamy, and the slices will compress and tear. The cooling period allows the starches to firm up and the moisture to distribute evenly throughout the loaf, making it much easier to slice cleanly. The structure also continues to develop during cooling as the starches retrograde, which is a fancy way of saying they crystallize slightly and firm up. Once cooled, the loaves move to the slicing machines, which are incredibly impressive pieces of equipment. A typical bread slicer can cut an entire loaf into perfect slices in just a second or two. The machines use multiple blades arranged in a row, and the loaf passes through all of them at once, emerging on the other side as a neat stack of evenly sliced bread. The blade spacing can be adjusted to create thick or thin slices depending on what's needed. The blades are incredibly sharp and are replaced regularly to ensure clean cuts without tearing or crushing the bread. After slicing, the bread moves immediately to the packaging line. Speed is crucial here because sliced bread dries out quickly when exposed to air. The loaves are automatically dropped into plastic bags, which are then sealed to lock in freshness. The bags pass through printing machines that stamp on the best before date and batch code, allowing for traceability if any issues arise. The sealing process uses either heat or adhesive to create an airtight seal that keeps the bread fresh. Some factories also include a metal detector at this stage, which checks every loaf to ensure no metal fragments from the machinery have accidentally ended up in the bread. Any loaves that trigger the detector are automatically removed from the line for inspection. This is just one of many quality control measures that ensure the bread is safe to eat. X-ray systems are also sometimes used to detect foreign objects that wouldn't be picked up by metal detectors. The packaged loaves are then packed into larger crates or boxes, stacked onto pallets, and moved to a warehouse where they await distribution. Most factory bread reaches supermarket shelves within 24 hours of being baked, which is why it can legitimately be called freshly baked, even though it was made in a factory rather than a traditional bakery. The distribution network is incredibly efficient, with trucks leaving the factory throughout the day and night to deliver bread to shops across the country. The incredible scale and numbers. The numbers involved in industrial bread production are absolutely staggering when you really think about them. A large bread factory can produce anywhere from 200,000 to 400,000 loaves every single day. That's enough bread to make sandwiches for millions of people. If you lined up all the loaves produced by a single factory in one day, they would stretch for dozens of kilometers. The amount of flour used is equally mind-blowing. A busy factory might use over 300 tons of flour every single day. Over the course of a year, that's more than 100,000 tons of flour being transformed into bread. That flour comes from wheat grown on thousands of hectares of farmland, harvested by combines, milled in huge facilities, and transported by truck and rail to the bread factory. The factories also use tremendous amounts of water, with some facilities using over 100,000 litres per day when you account for the water in the dough, the steam in the ovens, and the water needed for cleaning all the equipment. Energy consumption is another huge consideration, with the ovens alone requiring enormous amounts of gas or electricity to maintain their high temperatures all day and night. Employment numbers are significant too. A large bread factory typically employs between 200 and 500 people working in shifts around the clock. These workers include bakers, machine operators, quality control specialists, maintenance technicians, hygiene staff, and logistics coordinators. Many of them have worked in the bread industry for decades, developing deep expertise in the art and science of industrial bread making. The UK as a whole consumes an incredible amount of bread. We eat approximately 12 million loaves every single day, which works out to about 4 billion loaves per year. That's roughly 60 loaves per person annually, or more than one loaf per week for every man, woman, and child in the country. Bread remains one of the most popular foods in Britain, with most households buying it regularly. The bread industry is also worth billions of pounds to the UK economy. The market for packaged bread alone is worth over £3 billion annually, with millions more generated by in-store bakeries and specialty bread makers. Thousands of people work in bread production, from the farmers growing wheat to the truck drivers delivering loaves to your local shop. The supply chain behind factory bread is incredibly complex and sophisticated. Wheat farmers need to plant their crops months in advance, predicting what the demand will be when harvest time comes. Flour mills operate continuously to turn wheat into flour, coordinating closely with bread factories to ensure steady supply. Packaging manufacturers produce billions of bread bags every year. Transport companies move raw materials to factories and finished products to distribution centres and shops. All of these moving parts need to work together seamlessly to keep bread flowing to consumers without interruption. Quality control in modern bread factories is extensive and rigorous. Samples are taken at multiple points throughout the production process and tested in on-site laboratories. Technicians check the protein content of flour batches, the activity level of yeast, the pH and temperature of dough, the texture and colour of baked loaves, and dozens of other parameters. If anything falls outside the acceptable range, adjustments are made immediately to prevent entire batches from being wasted. Hygiene standards are also incredibly strict. Bread factories are required to maintain hospital-level cleanliness to prevent contamination. Workers wear protective clothing, hairnets, and gloves. Equipment is cleaned and sanitized multiple times per day. Air filtration systems prevent dust and contaminants from entering production areas. Regular inspections by food safety authorities ensure factories are meeting all regulatory requirements. Do you know that some bread factories are so large they have their own in-house maintenance teams that work exclusively on keeping the machinery running? These engineers and technicians are on call 24/7 because any breakdown in the production line can cost thousands of pounds per hour in lost production. The machinery is serviced regularly according to strict schedules, with parts replaced before they wear out to prevent unexpected failures. Why factory bread dominates the market? So why has factory-made bread become so dominant when we could all just bake our own or buy from artisan bakeries? The answer comes down to convenience, consistency, and cost. Convenience is probably the biggest factor. Most people simply don't have the time or inclination to bake bread from scratch several times a week. Between work, family commitments, and everything else, grabbing a pre-sliced loaf from the supermarket is far easier than spending hours mixing, kneading, proofing, and baking your own. Factory bread fits perfectly into modern lifestyles where time is precious and convenience is highly valued. Consistency is another major advantage. When you buy a loaf of factory bread, you know exactly what you're getting. Every slice will be the same thickness, the texture will be identical from one loaf to the next, and the taste will be familiar and predictable. For many people, especially families with children, this consistency is reassuring. There are no surprises, no variations, just reliable bread that works well for sandwiches, toast, and everything else. Cost is perhaps the most compelling reason for factory bread's success. Because of the economies of scale achieved by mass production, factory bread is incredibly cheap. You can buy a decent loaf for just £1 or £2, which is far less than what you'd pay for artisan bread from a specialty bakery. For budget-conscious families, especially those with children who go through bread quickly, the affordability of factory bread makes it the obvious choice. The shelf life of factory bread is also significantly longer than homemade or artisan bread. The additives and preservatives used in industrial production, combined with the airtight packaging, mean factory bread can stay fresh for several days or even a week. Homemade bread often goes stale within a day or two, which can lead to waste if you don't eat it quickly enough. Factory bread has also evolved to meet changing consumer preferences. Modern factories produce an enormous variety of breads beyond just plain white sliced loaves. You can find wholemeal bread, seeded varieties, soft rolls, bagels, wraps, and dozens of other products, all made using similar industrial processes. Some factories even produce premium ranges that try to mimic artisan bread while still benefiting from the efficiency of mass production. That said, there has been growing criticism of factory bread in recent years. Some people argue that the fast production process and the use of additives create a product that's less nutritious and less digestible than traditional bread. The short fermentation time means the phytic acid in wheat isn't broken down as much, which can interfere with mineral absorption. The rapid production process also means the bread doesn't develop the complex flavors that come from slow fermentation. There's also concern about the amount of salt in many factory breads, with some loaves containing significant amounts that contribute to our daily sodium intake. Health organizations have been pushing bread manufacturers to reduce salt content, and many have responded by gradually lowering the amount used in their recipes. Some brands have successfully reduced salt by 20 to 30% without significantly affecting the taste. Despite these criticisms, factory bread remains incredibly popular and shows no signs of disappearing. For most people, the benefits of convenience, cost, and consistency outweigh any potential drawbacks. The bread industry continues to innovate, developing new products and improving existing ones to meet consumer demands. The future of factory bread. Looking ahead, the bread industry is facing some interesting challenges and opportunities. Automation is likely to increase even further, with more robots and artificial intelligence systems taking over tasks currently done by humans. Some factories are already experimenting with fully automated production lines that require minimal human intervention, with robots handling everything from ingredient mixing to packaging. Technology is also opening up new possibilities for customization and personalization. Some experts predict that future bread factories might be able to produce small batches of customized breads tailored to individual consumer preferences, combining the efficiency of industrial production with the variety of artisan baking. Imagine being able to order a loaf with your preferred grain mix, seed combination, and crust darkness, all produced in a factory but customized just for you. So that's it. From humble flour and water to perfectly sliced loaves on supermarket shelves, factory-made bread is a triumph of modern food production. Those massive facilities churning out hundreds of thousands of loaves daily represent decades of innovation and refinement. The process combines traditional baking knowledge with cutting-edge technology to deliver consistent, affordable bread to millions of people every single day.